Who could have imagined that a 13-year-old boy would become the arbiter of the fate of the entire cosmos, and that the price of power would turn into unprecedented suffering? It happened in the 238th year of our era, when Gordian III, the youngest of the Roman emperors, ascended the throne by the will of the Senate and by the treachery of his own uncle. In the 225th year of that same era, amidst the legendary terraced gardens of a villa on the hills near Tivoli, Marcus Antonius Gordianus was born, later to enter history as Gordian III. The villa rose above the Tiber, its Carrara marble gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, and fountains fed by aqueducts filled the air with murmuring coolness. Soft shafts of light filtered through palms and statues of the gods of Olympus. And in the spacious library, where scrolls from Alexandria arrived, the philosophical treatises of the Stoics resounded. By the age of 5, the boy freely quoted passages from Virgil's Aeneid. By 8, he had mastered ancient Greek and engaged in heated debates with adult thinkers. By 10, he could recite the speeches of Cicero and Ovid's Metamorphoses in full. With his extraordinary beauty, reminiscent of a living Greek statue, he enchanted both men and women, and the senators fell silent at the sight of his graceful stride through the marble halls. Yet behind this brilliance lay not only triumphs of mind and aesthetics. By order of his uncle Philip, the future Emperor Philip the Arab, Gordian was named Caesar, and at 13 raised to Augustus, making the boy a puppet in the merciless game of power. His days were filled with lessons in rhetoric, training with veteran gladiators, and the study of military tactics, and his clear voice measuring out lines of poetry filled the halls. It was the resounding harmony of an unruffled mind, youthful charm, and a touch of androgyny that foretold the tragedy already brewing in the shadows of political conspiracies and poised to strike with ruthless cruelty. How could one crown a child barely able to stand, whose heavy purple mantle weighed more than his own body? Thousands of Romans, from noble aristocrats in velvet robes to the worn commoners, crammed into the Roman Forum, jostling between marble columns and hoarsely chanting the sacred names of Gordian and Gastes, while the boy himself, trembling, stood atop the steps of the Temple of Jupiter the Great, barely visible through clouds of fragrant incense. The ceremony was meant to awe both mortals and gods. The priest oracles, arrayed at the altar, inspected the entrails of 12 sacrificed bulls and declared the omens supremely favorable. The golden eagles of the Roman cohorts flashed in the sun. Resounding blasts of bronze horns echoed across the square. In every corner of the city, admiring crowds gathered. Many beheld for the first time the younger son of a humble family suddenly proclaimed emperor. But those who knew of the secret intrigues of the despot Maximinus understood that before them was not a triumph, but a fatal undertaking. Gordian, scantily covered by his mantle, resembled a child in a carnival costume. The laurel crown of gilded branches kept slipping from his slender head, and in his eyes burned not joy, but fear. The very hands that had blessed him and anointed him with sacred oils by night in the imperial chambers now savagely stripped him of all dignity and began to turn him into a soulless instrument. The same hands that had blessed him and anointed him with holy oils were by night in the imperial chambers, brutally stripping him of all dignity and beginning to turn him into a soulless instrument. The palace was cleared of all unnecessary or overly observant servants. The corridors emptied, and in a secluded room curtained with heavy canopies, a guard was posted who answered only to Maximinus. "Now you are emperor," he said hoarsely as he locked the door. "But remember who is the true ruler here. Your body, mind, and will are henceforth subject to my intellect, and I will see to it that you never forget it." The morning of the next day brought no promised grandeur. The young Gordian was subjected to brutal physical training for imperial duties, as if he were a slave, and the invited physicians, accustomed only to tending the doomed, set to work. Have you ever heard how children's moans echo in the dungeons of the imperial palace? It was there that a gruesome drama unfolded that forever changed the fate of the Roman Empire. In the depths of the Palatine Hill, behind thick stone walls, lay a room where the court doctors, sworn to Aesculapius to protect life, instead of solemn words of oath received from Maximinus, the Thracian, a chest of gold, and threats of torture, more dreadful than the tongues of bloody Tartarus. In the 244th year, rumors spread through the palace of a grave illness afflicting the young emperor Gordian III. Official bulletins, artfully forged and sealed with the imperial signet, brimmed with alarming descriptions of an unknown malady, capable of depriving the ruler of the strength to lead armies and govern the Senate. Meanwhile, crowds of Romans in the Forum offered prayers to all the gods, from Jupiter to Minerva, in hopes of restoring the young sovereign's vigor. Fragments of conversations among soldiers and messengers about a significant improvement or sudden relapses drifted through the palace corridors, but the audience halls remained half empty, and the laurel wreaths for the emperor were replaced ever more rarely. In a chamber specially fitted out in the dungeons, where not a single sound could escape, a secret operation began: the castration of Gordian III. By the faint light of oil lamps and in utter silence, the doctors with defiled souls carried out the horrific procedure, depriving the boy not only of his physiological manhood, but of the voice in which Rome's entire future was contained. They reveled in their victory, not in words, but in reducing the emperor to the status of a voiceless puppet. Imagine one of the greatest rulers in the world driven to the condition of a woman's concubine. Maximinus pursued a far more perverse aim than mere seizure of power. He sought to possess both the mind and body of Gordian, turning him into an extension of his own will. The once renowned general ordered the creation of an entire system of suppression, pain and public humiliation alternating with a meticulously devised reward program in which every whim of the rapist was engraved upon the young emperor's consciousness. During private audiences, Gordian was forced to don sheer silk togas, paint his face with vivid pigments, and perfume himself with rare oils so that he would behave like a submissive woman ready to satisfy any of Maximinus's depraved desires. Modern historians encountered references to these atrocities only in the 18th century, when a hiding place was discovered in the Roman catacombs, and the secret documents were later transferred to the Vatican archives. Modern historians first encountered mentions of these atrocities only in the 18th century, when a hiding place was discovered in the Roman catacombs, and later, the secret documents were transferred to the Vatican archives. There are preserved detailed reports of how Gordian, disguised in women's clothing, was forced to serve wine to guests at receptions, wear thin purple silk that emphasized his fragility, and night after night listen to the words, "You are my little empress." When official hours arrived, Gordian, like an actor in a tragedy, would reclaim his male appearance, go out to the Forum, sign the decrees drafted by Maximinus, receive foreign envoys according to a predetermined script, and hold court, pronouncing judgments that came not from him, but from his master. The fate of the empire was decided not by the Senate's council or by the will of the gods, but by the sinister game of a cruel usurper. Even the eldest senators, accustomed to court intrigues, noted that in Gordian's eyes shone neither boyish curiosity nor the strength of an adult monarch, and his voice sounded detached, as if the young ruler himself were hidden deep within an impenetrable shell. This story teaches us that absolute power not only corrodes the one who holds it, but also breeds monstrous cruelty capable of destroying the most innocent. While Rome was preparing for triumphal processions, offering sacrifices to the gods and extolling its youthful ruler, behind the marble facades of the palace, an impassive tragedy was unfolding, turning the most powerful man in the world into a defenseless plaything of tyrannical ambitions. The most powerful man in Rome proved to be a prisoner of his own palace. Behind the sumptuous facade of imperial celebrations and triumphal parades lay a genuine nightly drama. While on the Roman Forum and the slopes of the Palatine Hill, Romans praised the young ruler, carrying torches in their hands, inside the palace an unprecedented nightmare unfolded. The emperor himself had just turned 13, yet his soul had already become the hostage of his cruel uncle Maximinus. Gordian developed an extraordinary psychological defense and seemed to divide himself into two personalities. By day, when sacrifices were offered to Jupiter on the Capitol and the senators' gazes were fixed on him, he appeared majestic, with a voice full of confidence and prudence, every word of his sounding like law, every movement bearing the weight of the authority expected of an emperor. But as soon as the torches in the palace corridors were extinguished and shadows began to dance on the marble walls, he was transformed into Maximinus's will-less puppet. The servants whose loyalty had been bought with gold or secured by fear became witnesses to the horrifying changes. Gordian's face acquired delicate features, his skin grew astonishingly velvety, his gait almost graceful, and his voice soft and high, like that of a maiden from a senator's household. Maximinus elevated this transformation to the level of a religious ritual. Before dawn, he would enter his nephew's chambers, gently touch his golden curls, as if marking the boundaries of his power, and at breakfast dictate the exact text of the imperial decrees, show him which gestures to repeat on the rostrum of the Roman Forum and which words to speak before the Praetorian Guard. "Every line sealed with your stamp," he whispered, running his fingers over Gordian's slender digits, "is not merely a law, it is your life, your unconditional submission to me. You are my body and my soul, and never forget that. You are my body and my soul, and never forget it." This is how every public scene was created. The star emperor appeared before the people, smiled at the right moments, displayed seriousness in his speech, and declaimed carefully rehearsed phrases as if there were not a living man behind him, but a puppeteer pulling the strings of every one of his breaths. In the eyes of Rome, he retained the image of a great sovereign, yet in fact he was merely a toy in the hands of his uncle, whose true destiny was decided in the gloomy corridors of the palace. It is terrifying to imagine that the young emperor was no more than a puppet on strings. Behind the marble walls of the palace, the invisible hands of Maximinus controlled his every step, determining not only the content of state decrees, but the very course of his life. From childhood, Gordian lived under the strict supervision of his powerful uncle, who for political reasons meddled in everything, from the schedule of official receptions to the most intimate family secrets. The Romans, captivated by the palace's splendor, saw in him the heir to a great dynasty and the pillar of fragile stability. But behind the glittering facades lay the heart-wrenching truth of beatings, humiliations, and nightmares. When Gordian turned 15, his body and mind had grown strong enough for him to fully grasp the scale of what he had endured. Paradoxically, the constant degradations awakened in him a hidden strength, an unyielding will to survive that even the calculating Maximinus had not foreseen in his meticulous designs. At first, the changes were barely perceptible. In the morning lessons on governance, Gordian posed seemingly innocent questions in which doubt and inquisitive interest already whispered. He scrutinized the senators' faces during audiences, memorizing every fold of their togas, noting the inflections of their voices, and assessing who among them was loyal to his uncle and who was ready to back the young emperor. At night, when Maximinus, drunk on wine and intoxicated by power, fell asleep, Gordian sat in the half-light of the lone bronze lamp, his gaze fixed on the marble ceiling, and secretly forged an impeccable plan of vengeance that would have astonished the ancient gods with its perfection. Mixing ground charcoal from torches with fresh water, he prepared secret ink, and on small leather sheets stolen from the court scribes began gathering evidence. Letters addressed to the most influential senators, Lucilius, Marcius, Aretinus, and others, contain precise information on names and dates, corroborated by the testimonies of chamberlains and bodyguards. Each new sheet he hid behind the statue of Venus in his chambers, deliberately choosing it as the guardian of his truth. Night after night, he added fresh details, carefully writing out dates in words, and systematizing eyewitness accounts, creating an irrefutable compendium. Gordian mastered the greatest lesson of Roman politics: patience. He understood that he would have only one chance to overthrow Maximinus, and that moment had to be flawless, without the slightest loophole for escape or justification for the usurper. Imagine the 16-year-old nephew of the emperor waiting for darkness, whispering with a Greek slave woman the plan to topple the most ruthless tyrant of Rome in the 235th year after the murder of Alexander Severus. Maximinus the Thracian ascended the throne, the first soldier emperor never to have set foot in the Senate, who surrounded himself with personally recruited legionaries and held the state under an iron heel. In the 235th year after the murder of Alexander Severus, Maximinus Thrax ascended to the throne. The first soldier emperor who had never set foot in the Senate surrounded himself with personally recruited legionaries and held the state under an iron heel. Few in the halls of the imperial palace, adorned with marble and gilded statues, suspected the dark corridors where truly grim scenes unfolded. In this closed world, Gordian, maimed by his uncle's 3 years of torment, unexpectedly found an ally in Flavia, a captive from Athens brought by the cities of Athens and Corinth as a token of loyalty. Unlike most slaves bought with Maximinus's gold, Flavia had grown up in a family of Greek scholars, was fluent in writing in several languages, and knew the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle, making her mind sharper than any dagger. While the other slave girls feigned deafness and blindness, she carefully committed to memory the dates, the names of the guards, and the details of the beatings, tended Gordian's wounds daily, and wiped the dried drops of blood from the sheets as if an artist were brushing strokes on a dark canvas of endless suffering. Their first words to each other were sent in tense glances during the morning cleanings, and then grew into secret conversations in classical Greek, intelligible only to them. To utter the truth instead of whine would have been enough for Rome itself to shudder with horror when the dawn lit the Palatine Hill, and Gordian became the model nephew, gently smiling at Maximinus so that even the god of love would envy his caresses, obeying his every command without question like a buckle on a military saddle. Yet this softness was a polished masquerade. As soon as the sun began to decline towards sunset, he bared his steel intentions of vengeance. Meanwhile, his sister Flavia, having received an exquisite education from the finest Athenian masters of painting and versed in the works of the leading physicians, honed unassailable evidence. She recorded the names of the doctors who conducted the brutal tortures, noted the dates and places of humiliation, and sketched every scar and scratch in such minute detail that any anatomical treatise in Rome would envy her. The perfect moment arrived on the 15th day of March, 1241, when Maximinus staged a showy banquet in the hall on the Palatine, inviting the most influential senators to demonstrate that Gordian was merely a puppet, and poured wine for the guests himself, clad in a tunic of the finest silk that emphasized his feminine contours and bedecked with pearl bracelets, while the air was suffused with the light scent of rosewater and incense. But when the senators reached for their cups, Gordian and Flavia acted with military precision. From their sleeves fell scrolls with irrefutable proof of the crimes of Maximinus and his guards, drawings and lists testifying to the atrocities and exposing the dark heart of tyranny. The Senate chamber plunged into darkness and silence, then erupted in a storm of outrage and verdicts against the tyrant. That night, the walls of Rome heard for the first time the whisper of exposed lies and unmistakably understood that even the strongest power can crumble under the weight of truth. On that fateful night, the majestic halls of the palace on the Palatine Hill trembled not from the wind, but from lurking betrayal. In that fateful night, the majestic halls of the palace on the Palatine Hill trembled not from the wind, but from the betrayal lurking within. The banquet hall was adorned with such lavishness that it could outshine even the feasts of the gods on Olympus. Tables of Hittite marble bore golden vessels depicting Mars's victory over the barbarians, lamps burning fragrant oil blended with myrrh and Arabian incense cast a warm glow playing across marble statues of the ancestral emperors. Senators clad in purple togas, embroidered with laurel branches, took their places on the couches in the strict order inherited from the days of Romulus and Remus, when the Republican Council had yet held sway. On the dais, towering above all, sat Maximinus the Thracian, confident in his place, basking in the admiring gazes around him. Before him stood the young emperor Gordian III, like a juvenile actor at a courtly celebration, in a tunic of Egyptian linen and sandals, with silk ribbons chosen by his uncle to emphasize subservience. Approaching each senator with a silver pitcher of the finest Gallic wine from the vineyards of the Rhone Valley, he poured the drink with elegance honed under the guidance of the court's Greek tutors. Yet at the same time, as if performing a theatrical sleight of hand, he slipped a tiny scroll into each cup. These scrolls appeared blank, though the court physician Flavia had secretly sketched upon them a multitude of bruises, cuts, and scars covering Gordian's body, mute testimonies to the cruel torment he had endured. The senators continued chatting about levying fodder taxes and redeploying troops, but the moment they unfurled the scrolls, their faces drained of color, contorted in horror. The eldest among them, Lucius Balbus, whose reputation had remained unshakable through 4 emperors, was the first to recover his senses. His trembling fingers barely grasped the truth of the betrayal. A suffocating silence fell, quieter than a thunderclap. The senators lifted their eyes to Gordian III with a new, dreadful understanding. The sudden picture, his peculiar weakness, his submissive stance before Maximinus, the bans on senatorial decrees, had assumed a sinister meaning, and Maximinus, blinded by his own confidence and exultant triumph, glanced about lazily, oblivious to his power slipping through his grasp, and in that moment the conspiracy sealed its own doom. Proud Maximinus the Thracian, consumed by his self-importance and convinced he held the situation entirely in hand, failed to notice the heavy atmosphere settling in the hall. He pompously continued to enumerate the reforms he intended to enact, supposedly for the ruler's benefit, insisting on the necessity of purging assemblies of corrupt administrators, reallocating the tax burden in favor of the army, and fortifying the borders still fresh with wounds from barbarian invasions during the so-called 3rd century crisis, all the while unaware that his authority had already cracked at the seams. At that instant, Lucius Balbus, the senator renowned as an unyielding guardian of Roman honor, rose on the couch with regal bearing, and his form in the purple toga resembled a solemn shadow of the condemned. His voice was as sharp as a polished blade when he declared, "Today, Maximinus will fall for the sake of the Senate and people of Rome, for the sake of imperial dignity and divine justice. I accuse you of the gravest treason against the person of the sacred ruler." Instead of indignant rejection of baseless charges, Maximinus erupted, and his outburst became an undeniable confession of guilt. He lunged at Gordian III like a raging beast, hurling curses that confirmed every suspicion of those gathered. Instead of an indignant rejection of the baseless accusations, Maximinus erupted, and his reaction became an indisputable admission of guilt. He lunged at Gordian III like a raging beast, shouting curses that confirmed all the assembled onlookers' suspicions. "He is mine. I made him sovereign. I gave him power and can dispose of him at my discretion. He is my property, my plaything, my little concubine," he roared, trying to drag out the young emperor. Just think, the emperor was only 19 when his fate turned into a mystery, and the official chronicles proclaimed his heroic demise. In the 238th year, after the so-called Year of the Six Emperors, 13-year-old Gordian III was proclaimed ruler of Rome. At first, the Senate cherished hope in his youth, but behind the scenes, real power was seized by the Praetorians and their leader, Philip the Arab. 6 years later, when he turned 19, a dangerous campaign against Persia and Mesopotamia began. Roman legions stormed scorching wastelands along the banks of the Tigris, clashing with units of Shah Shapur. The official chronicles claim that Gordian perished in battle, displaying valor, but modern historians, having carefully examined the inscriptions on the stones around Nisibis and the letters of the legionaries, are increasingly inclined toward a version of suicide or even murder orchestrated by Philip the Arab. The motive was simple. The young emperor stood in the way of the general's ambitions, who was already preparing the throne for himself. Moreover, Gordian himself lived only 16 years free from the yoke of intrigue, an age when a person still has the right to simple human freedom, protection, and love. His death became a sad reminder that without restraint, absolute power quickly turns into merciless tyranny, and history, no matter how much we try to forget it, invariably returns to us with the terrible lessons of the past. The fate of the young emperor reminds us that true honor and dignity are sometimes found even in the most hopeless circumstances, and truth, no matter how bitter it may be, sooner or later will force its way through the centuries.